Good morning, or is it good afternoon? Thank you for inviting me to be here. I'm joining in this discussion, although that is not my expertise. I'm a user. I'm not a programmer. I'm not one of the people, the smart people who make digital connectivity possible. But I can talk about it, and I think it's important that I talk about it because I work with children and youth. And I work with children and youth around using their voices, powerful voices that they have, and very many times they don't even know how powerful those voices are that they have, impacting communities, impacting their own lives using their voice. I see digital connectivity as a way to use your voice. It definitely is, although we often forget it. Every time you post, every time you put a blog up, every time you do something on Instagram, you are using your voice. You're using the power of your voice, and you impact with the medium that you use, and it has outcomes. I'm sure it's been talked about a lot. So what I'm going to say is probably going to be a repeat in some instances, but bear with me, because to bring you to where I am and what I'm working on, I need to get through what you all usually work on, and that's on connectivity and the digital world. So I asked myself when I was told to speak, what is the role of digitalization in our lives, and in particular in Africa where I work with children and youth? The digitalization is there. We all have mobile phones, almost all of us. We have mobile phones. Many people have access to a computer. So we have information on tap just like you do. So when you're telling a young person they can or can't do this or that, if they belong to the set that they can get on the internet, they can check this out with Professor Google or Auntie YouTube and find out that yes, they can, or maybe yes, no, they can't. So they have access to information immediately. And they have access to information from anywhere and at any time, and quickly. So the way we deal with young people is changing. We are not the ones who know it all anymore. Our kids don't ask us anymore. They Google. Yeah? So that's also an interesting perspective for us adults, this instant access to information. What does it do when you press that button and you get that information? It doesn't care where you come from. It doesn't care what social class you have. It doesn't care what academic qualifications you have. We're all same. It neutralizes, so long as you have access. In other words, there's no excuse for being misinformed. There's no excuse for not knowing. There's no excuse for asking the dumb questions that many people ask around what's going on in the world, because we have access to information, an overload of information. But the problem with that is that it's difficult to differentiate, because we're getting so much information, we don't know whether it's real or fake, good or bad. We just suck it in. The one who can tell it best, who can entertain us the most, gets the most clicks, the most likes. So sometimes it has drastic consequences for us politically and socially. The political consequences I think we've seen over the last few years. A lot is happening very fast and surprising everybody. I won't go into detail. I will remain PC. But we know what that has done for the changing the face of the political space that we are living in today. So the question is, do we want more information or do we need less information? Is the information a danger to us in general and in particular to young people? And how can we get this information differentiated? There are good parts to all this information, so I'm not really criticizing digitalization. I'm not criticizing connectivity. It helps for access to education. Today, you can educate yourself without ever visiting a classroom. I know a friend of mine who told me the other day, her 14-year-old decided he didn't like the school system. It was in France, and he decided to opt out at 14. And he went online and got his A-levels. He finished his studies online because he said, I don't like the way they're teaching me. I'm not getting enough information. So it's empowered young people to be able to say, I can teach myself, or rather, I can get the information myself to learn. This possibility to be educated is particularly important to the African continent because very many times young people still have to pay for school fees. Their parents have to pay, and they can't access information. They can't access education. So the question is, how are we making it possible for young people to be educated? In the urban area, we've got our cyber cafes. They have possibilities, if they have a little bit of money, to get that education, meaning that they can be globally connected through their smartphones, if they have smartphones, through laptops. Even the farmers in the rural area are now using the mobile phone to do business. Digitalization allows them to be visible globally through working on websites, blogs, etc. So we built a bridge through digitalization. Our voices are being heard, multiple voices, powerful voices. What of hashtag #MeToo, hashtag Bring Back Our Girls? All that happened through the digitalization, the digital connectivity. The Arab Spring through the digital connectivity. So digitalization makes us be noticed, gives us a voice. But does it give us choices? Does it allow us to be selective? And this is the question that I ask, because I work with young people. I talk about the digitalization as a dependency on robot software. Very many times, what is on the internet is programmed. What is on the internet is specifically put out there for a specific outcome. Do we think of that? Do we think of the fact that because it's programmed, because it's robotic software, that we're reducing the possibility of us being differentiating, being objective about what's on the internet? Because everything gets neutralized, and the internet is unbiased. The internet is more patient than paper. In German, they have a saying, Papier ist geduldig. Paper is patient. The internet has immense patience. It'll take all of us with all of what we put on it, and we'll just regurgitate it and bring it out, back out there at the world. So it's become unbiased. It's almost clinical. And the question is that a good space to be in? And the thing about the value of what we put on there is based on its frequency and less on its content and what it does to whoever who's getting it. The impact that it has is based on the fact that how many likes do I get? I'm judged by that. I know that from the young people in the urban area I'm talking about now, who really wait. And every Instagram post, be it about a hamburger that looks a bit different, or an ice cream they had, or some plant they saw, or somebody who's got particularly interesting makeup on, it's about how many likes do I get? Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. I name them all, at least the ones that I know, So we have to think about that. There's the content of what we're dealing with, especially for young people. Is it relevant? Is it relevant socially? Is it relevant economically? Is it relevant to our environment? All the things that actually matter for the human race. And now you might call me naive. Because very many times when you look at what young people are looking at, if you look at what they're posting, if you look at what they're dealing with, we're talking about robotic software, where it's a programmed system that they buy into, that gives very little thought to the things I've just talked about. And I use an example of Hoover. We have these robotic Hoovers that go around for us women, probably, something made in heaven for us extra, where there's Hoovers for us when you're sitting having your coffee. You've seen them, they're being advertised. And I say these Hoovers, they don't discriminate. They're not, a Hoover will pick up your ring. You drop your ring by mistake, your wedding ring or whatever. It'll pick it up. It won't say, oh, that's a ring I daren't touch. Let me go and pick up the rubbish. For it, it's rubbish as well. Doesn't differentiate. It picks it all up. And that's what happens very many times when children are on the internet. Not to mention the isolation of working with a machine that replaces human beings with fictive figures that are created specifically to lure you in. I sound like I'm criticizing, but I'm not criticizing. I'm just putting it out there. The anonymity of the way this system works, digitalization, mobbing, you can do that without anybody even knowing you're doing it. A 40-year-old is suddenly a teenager. A 25-year-old is a child. All that is possible because of anonymity. The digital revolution is also endangering our connection with who we are as human beings that feel and cry and have emotions, because the digital system that is being used is emotionless. Don't be cheated by the robots that we're given and they've got a nice name, or even our navis that talk to us mostly in female voices, I noted, and you get the sense that you're talking to a human being. We must think about that as well. It's important for the children to connect with what it is to be a human being, beyond what it is to be a person who is dealing with something that is a machine, because that is what it is at the end of the day. It's a machine, and we cannot let our lives be governed by it. I'm not knocking it, because it has its uses. We all are using it now. But the problem with the way we're using it is very many times, and I am one of them, and that is why I have this fear and this anxiety, because I use a laptop, an iPhone or whatever. I use every medium I can use because I run 3 offices in 3 different countries in order to make my work possible. But I don't know what's happening at the back. The back office, I haven't a clue. I call it the back office. There's probably a better name for it, a more technical one. I haven't a clue what's happening. And I haven't a clue what this system is doing with what I'm inputting there. And this disconnect is something that we've just accepted. We went from writing on paper and things that you could see and somebody could check, everybody could understand it, to a place where we're dealing with a system that we don't know what's happening at the back of it. And often we can't even retrieve what we've done because it's too complicated. That is a question that we must ask ourselves. It's frightening. For me, it's frightening because I'm so dependent on it. And I think that most of us are so dependent on it. And the worst part of it for me is that we cannot, and I'm one of them, I'm talking as one of you, we are so afraid to click on delete or quit. Young people are getting mobbed and they cannot turn off their computer. They cannot close their Facebook account, but they're being mobbed. Children are committing suicide, but they're not turning off. In fact, they're going on the internet to tell the story and say, I was being bullied. And then they let go of life. We must think of that. And I feel the concern, and I talk like this because I work with children and young people. I know digitalization is here, and I know we have to adjust. We must. We have no choice. But we must start thinking about how we teach our children to maneuver this space. And we must also make it clear that we too are wondering how to maneuver this space. How many times have I said to myself, Auma, can you please go and do a computer course to understand what is happening behind that screen? Because when I get stuck, I always have to look for somebody to help me with the smallest of things. And my daughter, she will pick it up. She's a bit older now, but when she was very young, she would pick it up and in minutes, she said, okay, Mom, here you are. I fixed it. She's taken over. I don't even know what's going on in her head. And what she's asking, because she has the possibility or the ability to go behind that door that is my screen and check out what's going on behind there. We as adults must be concerned about this because the adjustment to the digital world must include our values, must include our ethics, must include how we treat each other and how we behave as a society, as human beings. We must not forget that. And also the other thing about the digital era is we're leaving people behind because it is certain societies that can access this digital connectivity. The urban area, it is mainly those who are a bit better off. The middle class, to an extent, but the lower class and the poor have very little access beyond their phones, and not many have the smartphones. So when we're including the normal phone in the mix, yes, the mobile phone gives them access, but not to the big wide web, the World Wide Web. So the lower and the middle class, in particular the rural area, are being left behind. It's a question, is it bad, is it good? We'll talk about that in a minute. So this digital divide is very, 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 very present. And we know about it also because we talk about smart cities. And now when we talk about smart cities, we're talking about cities that are digitally connected, right? We're not talking about them being smart because they're really doing good stuff, they've got a great infrastructure, the politics is going well, the community is being looked after. No, it's because they're internet connected. So I asked myself, what about the cities that are not connected? And that's, or well connected, and that's many, many cities on my continent, in Africa. What about the rural area, for example? Are they not smart? Is that the new definition of being smart? Being in the right place to be successful in our world? Is it being determined by digital connectivity? Because I've just questioned digital connectivity and what it does. We need to think about that in order to start thinking about what we mean when we talk about smart cities and what else has to be included. Because how can we keep up? How can we on the continent keep up? And I'm talking about the majority who are very, very poor, who have no access. And how can it be safe? How can it be safe to be connected? Because at the moment, it's not safe to be connected, at least not for young people. So for me, this is the fear I have in the work that I do, because I work with children and young people. I ask myself, if and when they get digitally connected, do they have freedom of choice? And what are the choices that they're going to have? As it is already, they're limited. Because the choice to be connected digitally means, first of all, you have to have access to education. And many do not have access to education. At least they don't have access to quality education. Because it's about quality education, not just education. And in the areas where I work, you'll find that 60% of the teachers don't turn up for school, so the kids can't even manage in the analog world, let alone the digital world. Then there's the good old word poverty. Many don't, or they think that they're poor. So the limited material wealth, the limited material resources, which implies that you would have to have a smartphone or a phone, also is a block and a limitation to their access to the digital connectivity. Discrimination, simple discrimination because the infrastructure to have digital connectivity is not there. I work in a rural area called Alego Nyangoma, near the lake area in Lake Victoria, Western Kenya. And this whole region that produces the most professors, doctors, I have a doctorate, PhD, doctors, architects, lawyers, you name it. All the intellectuals that come in, that most of, I do not say all, forgive me, most of the intellectuals come from this area. It's called Siaya County, including myself. And this area is one of the poorest areas in the country. It has no access to information beyond if you read a book or you pick up your phone, which is normally analog, and try to talk to somebody. Everybody leaves. Everybody moves to the urban area, they get the education and they move to the urban area. It has been discriminated upon because the rural infrastructure does not allow for digital connectivity. It has not been developed, either by us, doctors and professors and lawyers and what have you, nor the government. I say that quite blatantly. The other thing is that even if we were to have connectivity, where is the safety net? And this is where my fear comes in, and this is where my work is involved. Because in order to have connectivity, in my opinion, you have to be able to handle the perils and the pleasures or the satisfaction of being digitally connected. That must be a must. Because this community, if we, and this is my opinion, and I'm working on it because this is what our area does, and I will explain that in a minute. If digital connectivity comes to our area, to all the children I work with at present, and you will see pictures of them in a minute, what ends up happening is that they leave. Because everywhere else, to them, looks better than where they come from. Because living in the rural area in my community, in most of Africa, is considered, unless you're living in some beautiful villa by the lake and you have a lot of money and you also have a home in Nairobi, it's considered being poor. Because you have land, but it's ancestral land, and you have no monetary wealth. So people do not value that. So if they have access, unfiltered access, to this connectivity that opens up this world to them, it means that we will lose them faster than we have lost them through education. Because like I said, most of these smart guys coming from that area are in Nairobi or abroad or somewhere else, but definitely not working in this rural area and definitely not promoting the infrastructure. I'd like some pictures to be put on now. You will see the pictures rotating as I talk. You can pay attention to me because they keep coming again and again, so you'll see every picture maybe twice or 3 times, depending on how long I talk. So when I look and try to consider what is going on with these children, these are the children I work with. I look at the background of our culture, our heritage, and what is possible. And what I see is that we come from a background where the continent, not just this region, not just the country, is defined as being poor. Africa is spoken about as if it were a country. In German, very often one hears, oh, das Land, wir müssen was tun. That means that country must do something about it. Forgetting that there are 54 different countries. Nigeria alone, bigger than Germany by far, over 4 million inhabitants that are counted. So this perspective of Africa as being poor also defines who these children are, and what they think they can achieve. And this definition goes to the point that even Wikipedia, when it talks about development aid, it uses Africa as the example and talks about poverty using Africa as the example. So the children, may they have access to internet and go in to find out from Professor Google, what do people think about us? Who are we as Africans? What they will see is Africa as a continent that is basically just a country. It is poor, and it needs help. That is what they will get back to them. And they will get back to them the sense that they can only be helped if people from the West come, usually a middle-aged man, possibly with a beard, some years ago wearing Birkenstock, shoes. Now people are wearing suits because the NGO world has become a little bit more established and more institutionalized. That is the image they have, and they feel they cannot do it for themselves. So we have a mindset of a victim mentality, a community of beggars who are waiting to be given, waiting. Also, if it were to be internet and you told them come and get it and have it, they will take it because you've told them to do it, without thinking about it, without prejudice. So this is the situation. This is the backdrop of what we do. And unfortunately, with it comes a sense of entitlement because I am a victim, because I am poor, because the West put me there for whatever reason, or the West defined me more so, leave alone the put me there, the West defined me that way. I feel entitled to be helped. I feel entitled to be in a situation where I need to get handouts. I need to be given because I am poor. We have internalized this definition. The problem with this definition, however, for me, is that poverty is based on not having running water and not having electricity and living in a hut. And I tell the children, if you go to the Nordic countries in Europe, Norway, Sweden, Finland, you pay a lot of money to live in a hut with no running water, no electricity, and a pit toilet, plumpsklo. It's considered exotic. It's considered you are very wealthy. You're going back to nature. But in your context, you treat it as if you're poor. So we need to change the mentality before we even go digital. We need to change this mentality of dependency and passivity in our communities. Because if we just, again, take on what is coming from the West, and I'm not saying we haven't taken it on yet, but these young people actually don't have access to it yet. And this is my job because the work we're doing with them, at some point they have to have access because they need access to information, because it empowers them. It increases the power of their voice. But we need to do it with caution, because at the moment we're dealing with a community that thinks that they are poor, that feels they're dependent, thinks they're victims, and believes that they cannot do anything for themselves unless it is done for them by the West. Imagine when I came up and said, I want to work with your children. I'm Kenyan, I'm African, in other words, I'm black, and I'm a woman. Luckily, I have a big name. So they watched me and they waited. And many times they took their children back because they thought they were going to be given handouts, and it didn't happen. But we persevered. So what we do, my foundation is called Sauti Kuu Foundation, which means powerful voices, challenges a system that creates dependency and passivity. And we try to caution against exposure to a Western way of life, more intense than what they experienced already because we were colonized. We have a Western way of life anyway. So it's nothing new. We're not walking around in grass skirts and, with a bone in our noses or anything. Really, it's part of who we are. It's a question of to what extent are we exposed? And these children, luckily, are not yet so exposed. But you might say that's not fair because you want to keep them in a position and a situation of poverty. No, it's not that. I'm trying to teach these children, young people, and we work with children from the ages of 4 to 25, that they are not poor. The fact that you have no water and no electricity doesn't mean you're poor. These children and their families are rich. They have land. And I almost dare to say they have land in abundance because they don't use this land. They send their children to school to get a Western education, which is fine. I went through it, and here I am, and I like myself. They went through a Western education. I went through it too. But what they then do is they encourage, and this educational system encourages them to leave, to go to the city, where they normally end up in the slums. Poorer than what they thought they were. Living in huts, actually, because they're tin huts. I call them huts as well in the slums, but they're just tin shacks. So what we want to do is we want to introduce within the lives of these children a digital world that will give them power to use their voice and succeed in life. Because I know it's something that's going to happen. I know we need it, because when I'm working in the office here, I have no internet. My team has to climb a tree to try and talk to me on WhatsApp because they don't have any reception. So we can actually not work anymore, really, if I'm not there face to face, which is not realistic in our global world today. So the question is now, the thing is we need digital connectivity, but how much? How much do we need? This is the question. And what kind of a backdrop do we create for our young people, our children, to adjust to the digital world so that they can use it safely and responsibly? So what we do at Sauti Kuu, and this is in preparation, because we've just built a huge center. I think one of the pictures there, you saw some buildings. We're building a huge center that's going to include an IT lab, which is going to bring digital connectivity to the area. In fact, I have already gotten an information that it's very, very likely that we actually will bring fiber optic to the area, which means that not only my young people who are working with us in the programs are going to have access to internet, but the whole community. To me, it's a great prospect, but also a frightening one. So what we are trying to do to make it something that becomes part of the growth of the children and young people, part of what enhances their lives and adds value to their lives, we work on 4 different pillars with them. And this is, of course, not just for the digital connectivity. It's not just for the digital era, but this is the way our model works, so we strengthen who these young people are. So when they are confronted with such a system, they're able to maneuver it in a way that is intelligent and also is safe and mature. So we try to, first of all, strengthen their personalities. We work on developing that, strengthen their character, meaning the values and their ethics around being a social human being, around connecting with people, communicating with people. We show them that the very first thing is about being aware of themselves, seeing themselves being heard. And being heard before you get digital and go on Facebook and Instagram and all of that is being heard physically, that I hear your voice, because the rural children are not taught to speak. I work with these young people now for almost 10 years. And when I started, they were not talking to me. I started with 10 young people, and I sat them down and had a conversation. They were teenagers. And I told them, everybody leaves this community. If you see the pictures, it's beautiful here. Why are you all leaving? You all say you're hungry. You come begging for food. We have a kitchen garden, which is a demonstration garden. You all come and ask us for food. Why? Or when I come home, at that time we didn't have the kitchen garden. When I came home, people are always begging and saying, oh, give me something, give me something. And I said, why should I give you when you have this land? Why are we importing food into the area when we have the land and we can grow our own food? And they didn't answer me. They didn't speak. And now, a few years later, one of the young people who's still with me from that time, when I asked him, he said, why did you guys not talk to me then? Now you talk nonstop. And he said to me, you know, Auma, the hardest thing was when you asked us, what do we want? Because nobody had ever asked us. They grew up in homes where there are 5 or 6 children. The mother is exhausted, the father is busy or not there. And when mom calls John and she means Peter, Peter answers because he knows mom's tired and he's one of the children as well. Why not? So your own identity doesn't matter so much. And with that little non-existent self-esteem and not feeling that you're special or that as an individual you really matter, it's very difficult to use your voice. So we teach them to use their voices. We teach them to make sure that they get heard, to be able to realize that they too are important. We also make sure they go to school, because if you're going to access the digital era, you need to have some form of learning. You need to be able to read, at least, or you need to be able to articulate yourself. If you want to talk to Siri or whoever it is you're going to talk to, you still need to be able to articulate yourself and ask a question, and question as well, and be critical about things. So you have to learn to be able to work hard at school. We work with them around that. Staying in school. And when we talk about school, education and training, we're also talking about using your hands, vocational training, learning the skills to be able to actually use the resources that you have, which is your intelligence, to improve your life. So we make them very aware of that before. Redefine yourself. You are not poor. Be responsible. Your life is in your hands. You are your future. Be part of the decision-making process, because if you're not part of the decision-making process, people do things with you. You have to be able to say no. You have to be able to be part of determining what happens in your life, and you have to be accountable for it. You know, when kids are complaining, I worked on a campaign around mobbing, and one of the things was people were like, oh, they're victims, and you know, these horrible people who are victimizing them. And then I asked a simple question: why don't they switch off the computer? The person is not in the room with them. Switch off the computer. This addiction, learn to say no. Many young people don't know when to say no. And a lot of harm happens to them because they can't say no. So we teach them to do that. And when you learn to say no, you take action. When you learn to use your voice, you take action. And you take action that is your own action. You are proactive, meaning that you take the steps to make a difference in your life. You take the steps to make decisions around what happens to you. I'm sure you're probably thinking, she's just talking. These rural kids, how are they going to ever say anything to any adult? How are they ever going to be allowed in the context of their culture to be able to speak like that, like she's speaking up here? And you know what we do? We teach them with respect to be able to say no. And how we do that is we teach them to look you in the eye when they talk to you. Very difficult for us Africans. I see some of you here, because often our parents think when you look them in the eye, you're being disrespectful and you might get in a lot of trouble. I won't say what kind of. So we teach them with caution to have a strong voice, to be able to talk with their parents in such a way that they get heard. And how we do that is not just by telling them to do it. We have different projects, and one of the projects is the kitchen garden project. You saw the kitchen gardens there. Is that the kids were coming to us hungry. I know I've digressed totally from the digital world, but I'm coming back to that. The kids were coming to us hungry, and they would be wanting us to allow them to pick up some vegetables and go home and cook them. And I didn't know it was happening because it was happening with my team, and they loved the kids, so they were like, okay, just help yourselves. And when I found out, I said, hey, no, they can't have the food from our garden. And everybody looked at me like, well, why not? And I said, because the same land we are growing food on is the land that they have. In fact, we have less than them. So let them go and find out from their parents if they can get a small space. We're going to teach them how to grow their own food so they don't ask us for food, because that's all it takes. And we have a project called Grow to Eat. But this project is driven by the children. So the children who notice that actually we can feed ourselves, there's no reason why not, they will call their parents to be part of this program. And no parent can be part of the program without being invited by their child. And the garden is actually the child's garden. And they farm it together with their parents. And the parents come. We have 78 families now who have kitchen gardens that are farming in this area and are feeding their children. And what one of the parents told me was, you know, Auma, and it was actually a grandparent because the child is an orphan. You know, Auma, I never thought that my child could teach me. And Ronnie, the child who she was talking about, teaches her. And now if Ronnie is able to teach her, that means that she's listening to Ronnie. So Ronnie has a voice. And that is the point. These children, when they realize that they have a voice and they're being listened to and being taken seriously, they start making decisions. And very soon after, they start making the right decisions. So when I talk to the West, and I bring it into this context, I say, and it also hits us, because I call myself part of the West, because I'm living in Nairobi and I've basically grown up there, and my daughter is exposed more to the West than she is to a rural community. We don't listen to our children. So whatever our children are doing on the internet, whatever they're doing with their digital connectivity, has very many times little to do with the advice we've given them. Because part of giving advice is also taking advice. Part of a conversation is also listening. And we have to learn to do that. And that's what we do at Sauti Kuu. We try to redefine poverty, tackle it, and tell them you're not poor. We tell them you have options, realistic options to improve your life, meaning you can work the land, you can learn a skill, you can learn a vocational skill. Part of what is going to happen at that center is not only are we going to get into the digital era and get them digital connectivity, we're also putting a vocational center so they learn to work with their hands. Because this disconnect, we don't want them sitting as computers isolated, playing computer games, or even blogging or doing anything that sounds super intelligent. It is fine, but it has to be complemented by going out and being in the fresh air, working with your hands. It's got to be complemented by being in the real world, because our children at the moment are still in the real world. And that is the problem that I see. The disconnect, the digital divide, is that our kids are being separated more and more from the real world. They're sitting indoors, isolated. Even in a group, they're isolated because they're sitting together, having a meal or sitting whatever they're doing. And even us grown-ups are sitting, I've seen so many couples, everybody's on their iPhone, and I'm like, okay, is a conversation happening between them, or is a third, fourth party involved? That's where we're going. And that we must stop. And I have the pleasure and the luck and the blessing that I'm working with young people who are not yet there. Not yet in a situation where they're going to be hooked. I hope, because this is just a hope. I'm working with them. I'm working on them. So we create enabling spaces to make sure that we can do our very best that it doesn't happen, that this disconnect doesn't happen. And the spaces are not just physical spaces as what you saw there. They're also mental spaces, safe spaces. So the children, first of all, the physical spaces, like buildings, like I say, we've got the IT center, we've got the vocational center, we've got a resale center for learning workshops. We have all the sports facilities that we're putting in place. But the mental space, so you talk about these things. So you communicate with real people. You improve on your soft skills. You get you have creativity and critical thinking that you're learning, so that you don't just accept everything that comes your way. You criticize it, but in a good way, because you want to learn, you want to improve yourself. We want to teach them their responsibility as citizens, civic education. What is your responsibility in terms of what you're doing, be it on the internet or be it in your community? or with your friends and your closer network. The environment, what are we doing with our environment? All of this is stuff that they will learn also on the internet once they have access. But if they already know and appreciate it, they go about it very, very differently when they're now talking globally to the global world. And also the economics of it all. We teach them about what it is worth. What is wealth? Is it just money? Or is there more to that? And there definitely is more to that. So even though we're offering a space where materially they'll have access to computers, access to the internet, we want to make sure they're equipped to be able to use this system that is called digital connectivity without harming themselves and others, without isolating themselves, without creating a world that doesn't allow them to go outside, enjoy the real world that they live in, that the human being needs to thrive on. And if we succeed, our impact will not only mean that we've changed the mindsets, they're not victims, that they become innovative because they're creative, critical minds that are thinking and are able to contribute. We also make them responsible because when they're proactive, they're also responsible for what is happening around them. And they also take responsibility for others. And what we do in this group that we work with the kids, we have 500 plus children we work with, is that we make them responsible for each other. I'm curious to see what happens once we have internet installed around bullying, which is so common over the internet because it's a cheap way of making somebody feel bad without being caught. We will tackle it when the time comes, but I believe at the moment, working on their bullying issues on the ground will help with their bullying issues when they do become connected. And the accountability, the most important one. You must be accountable for your actions because you determine what happens in your life. That we teach them as well, and that is the critical one. So a question that we have to ask is, and they have to ask is, how do our choices affect us and others, and in the long run? That all ties into the sort of young people we're trying to help develop and nurture so that when they do become digitally connected, they'll be more responsible. And they'll be able to hit quit and be able to hit delete if and when it's necessary. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Auma. Thank you. There is something in your family about delivering speeches that reach people, that's for sure. The funny thing is, and that's really interesting, lots of the stuff Jaron Lanier said this morning about being critical, creative minds, thinking minds, hit delete, stop. It's very close to what you were saying about Africa. So,
did they all listen to him as well?
Yes, they did. But he was talking about the developed world, and you were talking about countries like Kenya, right? So there are lots of parallels. And you would be surprised how many problems we have to get broadband to rural areas. So, in Europe? Yeah, here in Germany.
Yes, I have had some calls where we didn't have connectivity. And I'm like, but we're in Germany. And they're like, yeah. It also doesn't work here.
One last question. How do we get money to your foundation?
We have one of my colleagues is here, and I can give the information to yourself.
Okay, and of course on the internet.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Oh, thank you.
That's
so much.
a
wonderful question. Never asked before.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.